is The History of Africa with me, Zeinab Badawi. It's based on a unique project overseen by UNESCO called The General History of Africa. That's Africa's history, written, interpreted and told by Africans themselves. In this episode, we see how kingdoms became established in West Africa that eventually gave rise to three of the greatest on the continent: the Ghana Empire, the Mali Empire with its heart in the legendary city of Timbuktu, and the Songhai Empire. We start in Mauritania in northwest Africa, which is inextricably linked with several of the historic empires based in and around the Sahara Desert. It's only when you come to the Sahara Desert and you look in front of you, behind you, to the right and left, and all you see is sand. And then you get a sense of just how unforgiving this terrain was and indeed is for those who make the trek for kilometre after kilometre across the desert. But unforgiving terrain or not, trans-Saharan trade meant those who controlled these desert highways and crossroads grew rich beyond measure and could establish powerful and wealthy empires. The first big empire was Ghana, which confusingly did not include the country Ghana, which today bears its name. This began as a kingdom around the year 600 and stretched across several countries in modern Africa: Mauritania, Mali, Senegal, and Guinea. This is Nouakchott, the Mauritanian capital, and it lies along the Atlantic coast. But 900 kilometers inland south of here is Kumbi Saleh, the old capital of the ancient kingdom of Ghana. This was founded by the Soninke people, who still live in Mauritania. The Soninke were the main inhabitants of the Ghana Empire. They called it the Empire of Ouagadougou in their language. Their descendants today maintain their vibrant culture and see themselves as custodians of their history, as I discover when I drop by the Soninke Community Centre in the Mauritanian capital, Nouakchott. They take a break from their dancing so I can speak with the head of the Soninke Association. So tell us, who were the Soninke people exactly?
Les Soninke, ils ont une histoire extraordinaire en Afrique de l'Ouest. C'était d'abord des cultivateurs, mais ils avaient aussi beaucoup d'autres métiers. Ils avaient beaucoup d'autres artisans. C'était des éleveurs, mais les Soninke, c'était aussi des guerriers. Il y avait le roi du Ghana qu'on appelait le Tunka, qui avait son armée. Il y avait autour de lui toute une population de guerriers, de chefs traditionnels, etc.
Simaka Sika is descended from an oral historian and performs a praise song about her people's noble origins. The kings of the Ghana Empire allowed local chiefs to keep their position, but they had to be loyal to the king and send him food and other goods. The king kept their sons as hostages in his royal court to maintain their allegiance. The Soninke people were keen fishermen then as they are today. Here they collect their evening catch. The selling of the fish falls to the women, and some set up oceanside cafes for those who enjoy fish at its very freshest. Along with fishing communities, the Soninke were herders and farmers. They used iron technology for swords, spears, farming equipment, and they also made decorative ceramics. Some of these objects from the Ghana Empire have been found and put on display at the National Museum in Nouakchott. I make my way there to meet its director.
Quand ils ont créé cet empire, l'essentiel de l'économie de cette culture de cet empire a été le commerce. C'est-à-dire que c'est un empire qui organisait le commerce entre le nord et le sud. Bon, l'organisation de l'empire était une organisation fédérale. C'est-à-dire qu'il y avait plus de 10 États qui sont fédérés à l'empire. Bon, la fédération aussi était très souple, c'est-à-dire qu'il reconnaissait le roi en tant que roi et il donnait des impôts au roi, mais chacun d'eux s'occupait de son état, si on peut dire, et l'organisait tel qu'il voulait. C'est le premier empire reconnu au niveau de l'Afrique de l'Ouest. Bon, ici, nous avons une vitrine composée de la céramique qui vient de Kumbisala.
Dr. Kane tells me these exhibits date mostly from between the 9th and 11th centuries and were excavated by archaeologists in the early 1900s.
Nous avons ici une statuette de femme qu'on a trouvée, donc qui montrait les statues de la femme, c'est-à-dire la forme de la femme dans l'Empire du Ghana. Et nous avons autre chose ici, c'est des brindilles en cuivre qui étaient utilisées comme monnaie dans l'Empire du Ghana. Pourquoi le cuivre? Parce que le cuivre avait plus de valeur que l'or. Par exemple, ce cuivre que vous avez été, 1 gramme de cuivre était échangé contre 3 grammes d'or. Donc ça avait vraiment de la valeur.
The rulers of Ghana occupied a strategic position halfway between the desert of North Africa and the gold fields of West Africa. This gave them a big advantage in controlling trans-Saharan trade, which helped them become immensely wealthy. Staging posts were established in and around the empire, like Walata and Wadan, in about the 11th century in northern Mauritania. Wadan, which is 600 kilometers from today's capital Nouakchott, is a place little seen by outsiders. But as I see for myself, it's well worth the visit. Wadan was an important camel caravan center and oasis. Today, its collection of stone buildings stand in ruin on a cliff overlooking the oasis. It is likely that the town prospered from the gold trade during the Ghana Empire because this route through the Sahara in northern Mauritania was probably used for the transport of gold during the time of the Ghana Kingdom. And this trans-Sahara trade was absolutely critical in underpinning the wealth of the rulers of Ghana, because they traded with Arab merchants, with North Africans, and Berber nomads, or Amazigh as they prefer to be called. The Ghana Empire exported iron and copper, but it was famed for its gold far and wide, as this description in the 11th century by the Arab geographer al-Bakri illustrates when he visited Kumbi Saleh.
The king adorns himself with ornaments around the neck and arms. On his head he wears gold, embroidered caps covered with turbans of finest cotton. He gives audience to the people for the redressing of grievances in a hut around which are placed 10 horses covered in golden cloth. On guard at the door are dogs of fine pedigree wearing collars adorned with gold and silver.
Gold was a commodity that Ghana used to buy salt. This was so valuable to them that they traded it almost weight for weight with gold. In fact, salt was at times used as a currency there. The salt was obtained in the form of rock salt bars from desert mines that fell outside the control of the Ghana Empire.
Et ce sel aussi a une qualité différente de l'autre sel que l'on connaît. Bon, ça c'est le sel qu'on appelle le sel gemme. C'est différent des sels qu'on utilise actuellement. Bon, et il était très apprécié dans l'Empire du Ghana et au sud, d'une manière générale, parce qu'il y avait beaucoup de maladies, c'est le sel qui pouvait les soigner. Donc, les deux produits principaux pour le commerce qui existait pendant l'Empire du Ghana, c'est le sel et l'or.
But Wadan's days of glory are long gone. It ceased to be a trading post. Local resident Mariam Lepiad has lived in the newly built part of Wadan for most of her life. There are about 5,000 people here. She tells me she just manages to stay in business selling basic amenities and the odd souvenir to the rare visitor.
لا دكان ما هو كبير نعتمد عليها الصناعة التقليدية هي اللي معتمدة عليه. التاريخ اللي أنا سمعه أنا ماني مضبوطة الكاميرا قال بعد الناس سمعوا زين ودان سمعت عنه زين.
Wadan went into decline in the 16th century. The old town, which is 2 square kilometers, is deserted and lies in ruins. By about the 11th century, the rulers of Ghana, through exposure to trade with Muslim Berbers and Arabs, adopted Islam. This helped to spread literacy in Arabic, the language of the Quran. A number of these Arabs and Berbers remained in Ghana or territory adjacent to it, some of it rich from the water of an oasis. Trade between all these groups was greatly facilitated by one major factor: the introduction of a beast of burden that was particularly well suited to the desert and had an unprecedented impact on Sahara trade.
The camel revolutionized trans-Saharan trade because it could keep enough water in its gut for 10 days, plus the fat in its hump provided it with nourishment for a considerable period of time. Now, the crossbreeding of the 2-humped camel of Central Asia with the 1-humped camel of Arabia produced a completely different type. One that was very slow in its movement but was capable of carrying heavy loads. This one was used for trans-Saharan trade, and the other was lighter on its feet and could travel very fast. And this kind of camel was used to carry news and as a bearer of messages.
Dr. Abdelwadoud Abdallah is one of Mauritania's leading historians.
قبل الجمل كان هناك حديث عن التجارة الصامتة، كانت تجارة محدودة، ولكن مع الجمل أصبحت هناك قوافل كبيرة تعبر الصحراء، أحيانا تكون من آلاف الجمال. إذن هو مثل ازدهار السفن بالنسبة للتجارة عبر البحار والمحيطات. الذي نعلمه مع التاريخ أن موجودة هذه الأسرة الحاكمة الصونيكية التي يتحدث عنها الرحالة والجغرافيين والمؤرخين العرب. إذن هذه الظاهر أنها كانت مملكة تجارية أساسا مسالمة، لا تسعى للدخول في الكثير من المعارك، وإنما تسعى لتنمية التجارة وتنمية التبادل التجاري، وازدهرت ازدهار كبير مع انتشار الإسلام.
The Soninke people of the Ghana Kingdom enjoyed good relations with the Arabs and Berbers, whose descendants make up a large part of Mauritania's population today. The Berbers, or Amazigh, like Ahmadiyya, were and still are the camel herders. All the men in his family take it in turns to look after the camels. Early in the morning, Ahmed gathers the animals and takes them to graze, returning late in the afternoon. He lives near Shingiti, an old historic town in northern Mauritania, not far from Wadan. It was also a key trading centre in the era of West Africa's great empires. Mohammed Dia is the head of the family. He has 8 children and around 10 grandchildren. Today, he's receiving a visit from the mayor of Shingiti, so he puts on his best white robe. I arrive soon after.
حاج محمد أتكلم معك بالعربي فأنت عايش بنفس الشكل كأجدادك من زمان يعني بدو
اللي صار عايشين بها أجدادي مات هو المعيوش به ماتت الناس عايشة به كنا عايشين بالزرع براف جدجي نمشوا من هون جايسين السبخ نجيبوا الملح نقيسوا به السوداء مالي.
I wonder how the younger members of Mohammed's family integrate these traditions with modern lifestyles.
وبتفتكر الجيل الجديد الجيل الجديد أحفادك أولادك حيتحافظوا بالتقاليد البدوية ولا لا؟ ما بيفهموا.
قليل همهم هم اللي تغير هذا الورك الزمن وهلو القراية والشقلة في الشهور ولكن الحيوان ما تلهم ما هو ياسر قليل اللي تلهموا من الناس.
C'est très important pour nous les nomades puisqu'ils font partie de notre identité culturelle. Donc on vit dans les mêmes conditions qu'ils conservent nos habitudes. Ils conservent nos habitudes, les habitudes de nos ancêtres, mais tout en améliorant dans le cadre de l'éducation et dans le cadre de la santé.
مريض انت بنت الحاج حواء وانت
بنت عمو
بنت عمو وانتوا بتدرسوا ولا شغالين بتعملوا
ما يدرسوا ما يدرسوا
عايزوا سبه
I leave to take a look at the historic town of Shingiti. And in true nomad hospitality, Mohammed offers me a parting gift which I gratefully but politely decline. I set off in my car and Mohammed departs for urgent business in a more environmentally friendly manner. I make it to Shingiti, a crossroads in the desert where goods, ideas, language and religion were exchanged. Its historic buildings, including the mosque, date back to the 13th or 14th century.
The old quarter of Shingiti is not quite the bustling metropolis it once was. Now, notable buildings here include the ancient mosque behind me, which has got a square minaret with 5 finials made of ostrich eggs. And in ancient times, traders would come here to do their business, just to gossip, or, of course, to pray. And in fact, Shingiti was a popular gathering spot for pilgrims on their way to Mecca. And so it became a holy city in its own right. And Shingiti was therefore a magnet for Muslim scholars. They would come here to receive training in religious studies, but also mathematics, science, astronomy, and law.
Thousands of ancient documents have been preserved in Shingiti. Thai teacher Saiful Islam has for several decades been director of his family foundation that maintains some of these documents written in Arabic.
شنقيط لم تكن فقط مدينة روحانيات، مدينة تصوف، مدينة دين، بل أنها كانت معبراً اقتصادياً في غرب إفريقيا، بل أنها كانت المعبر الإجباري على جميع القوافل التي تمر عبر الصحراء هذا المسجد هو هنا. هذه المباني لا تزال شاهدة على التراث. المكتبات غنية تفوح طيبا ورائحة علم. المباني تحتفظ بطابعها التقليدي الأرشتكتوري المعماري الذي لم يتغير حتى الآن. كل هذا ما زال شاهدا على أن شنقيط ما زالت بخير وستظل إن شاء الله. المكتبات، مكتبات شنقيط هي بقايا أيضا من بقايا شنقيط، بقايا الموروث الثقافي، المخطوطات التي كانت عند الأسر. طبعا ليست كل الأسر تملك المخطوطات، هي أسر علمية معلمة. العلمية المعلمة كانت لديها مخطوطات، كانت تستجلبها من شتى بقاع العالم أو تكتبها عندها محليا، هذا سواء. النتيجة أنه حصل كم هائل من المخطوطات.
The influence of Arabic and Islam extended across the Ghana Empire. But the rulers of Ghana began to lose control of trade to more powerful rival groups, such as the Mandi people, who were sometimes known as the Mandinka. There were also environmental reasons behind Ghana's decline. Much of its farmland was worn out, partly through overgrazing. The Mandi launched a major offensive in 1235 under the leadership of Sundiata Keita.
Sundiata Keita took control of the Soninke people and much of the former kingdom of Ghana and began building a vast new empire for himself, that of Mali.
After the break, we visit the most famous of the cities of the Mali Empire, the legendary Timbuktu. This is Bamako, the present-day capital of the country Mali. The Empire of Mali, established by Sundiata Keita in 1235, was bigger than that of Ghana. It extended across many more countries in modern West Africa. Sundiata Keita established his capital in Niani, on the border today between Mali and Guinea. He ruled the Mali Empire as a federation of kingdoms and chiefdoms, and significantly established social and political norms laid down in a landmark Charter of Rights in 1236. This formed the basis for how he would govern his subjects. These principles have become known as the Mandi Charter, which upheld the liberty, dignity, and equality of all the citizens of Mali. Professor Kanate is one of the editors of UNESCO's General History of Africa and says we know what the Charter set out through oral history.
Notamment le savoir-être et la question des normes. Vous avez parlé de la charte de Kouroukanfouka. C'est extrêmement important. Et on a souvent dépeint l'Afrique comme, vous connaissez très bien la façon dont l'historiographie coloniale a dépeint l'Afrique, comme un espace sans loi, sans foi. Mais en réalité, on s'aperçoit que ce qui était important et qui a permis la formation de ces grands ensembles, c'était des normes. La question des normes qui permettaient aux gens de vivre ensemble. La charte qui a été édictée sous Sundiata Keita est celle qui, en quelque sorte, établit les bases de l'Empire du Mali. Et ce document a donné lieu récemment à une mise en forme. Il faut dire les choses telles qu'elles sont, parce que la charte, elle est d'abord orale. Le savoir-être, le savoir-faire sont aussi importants que les monuments.
Sundiata Keita assumed the title Mansa or Kanka, which means king, and he taxed all goods going through his territory. The most famous of the cities in the Mali Empire is Timbuktu, which Sundiata Keita had captured from the Tuareg or Berber nomads. He made it a center for traders and scholars. Getting to Timbuktu is pretty hard. At the time of filming, I could only visit with an armed guard. The airport is closed to commercial flights and the area is deemed unsafe because of the activities of extremists. So finally made it to Timbuktu. First impressions, well, it's hard to see how this dry, rather unprepossessing city, the new part at least, was at the center of one of the greatest empires of Africa. But I haven't got to the old part yet. But as I've been driving through, you do see evidence of some of the destruction when the city was overrun by the extremists in 2012. And of course, they destroyed much of the historical heritage of Timbuktu. It's attained almost mythical, fabled status. You know, in English we say, you'd think she was going to Timbuktu as a kind of metaphor for somebody who's going to the back of beyond. Well, here I am. I meet up with Salim Oud El Haj, a culture and heritage expert born and bred in Timbuktu.
Tombouctou est la ville la plus connue de l'Empire du Mali parce que c'est très loin des centres de conflit. Tous ceux qui sont persécutés à cause de leur religion ou bien à cause des guerres intestines viennent se réfugier à Tombouctou. En plus, Tombouctou, c'est le commerce du sud et du nord. Le sud vient dans des pirogues par le fleuve, les produits d'Afrique occidentale. Ici, et le chameau du Sahara et de la Méditerranée viennent à travers le Sahara avec les marchandises du Sahara et de la Méditerranée. Ici, et c'est un centre d'échange. Ainsi, les gens deviennent très riches et ils ont créé des médersas pour écrire, pour faire des correspondances, pour faire des lettres. Et ces médersas se sont transformés à la longue en poursuivant leurs études par des universités.
Sundiata Keita was succeeded by his son, Mansa Musa, who expanded the empire. But the best known of Mali's rulers is Mansa Musa I, great-nephew of Sundiata Keita. He was so famous he was depicted in this map of the world by a Spanish cartographer in the 14th century. In 1324, Mansa Musa began a lavish pilgrimage to Mecca, reportedly with a very large entourage of 60,000 porters and 500 servants decked in gold, each carrying a golden staff. En route, he stopped in Cairo. He was received with great reverence by the ruler of Egypt. This is a description of Mansa Musa by an Arab scholar and writer Al-Makrizi from the 14th century.
He was a young man with a brown skin, a pleasant face, and a good figure. His gifts amazed the eye with their beauty and splendor.
Et la légende dit, quand il est arrivé à Tombouctou avec sa caravane de chameaux, la tête est à Tombouctou alors que ce n'est pas fini de sortir de Niani, la capitale du Mali. Il a traversé le Sahara et il est parti en Égypte et en Arabie Saoudite. Il a distribué tellement d'or, beaucoup d'or, de telle sorte que le coût de l'or a chuté. Et il est devenu légendaire.
I asked Professor Kanate if we have any idea of just how rich Mansa Musa was. Some accounts hold that he was carrying as much as 150 kilograms of gold, and that if you take his wealth in total, by today's value,
he could be worth as much as $400 billion, which would make him the richest individual in history, period. Do you think that could be the case?
Oui, je pense, enfin, c'est possible. Mais ce qui est sûr, c'est que la quantité d'or qu'il a apporté au cours de son pèlerinage était une quantité suffisamment impressionnante. Mansa Musa a appris à écrire l'arabe et il a même laissé un traité en langue arabe sur la bienséance. C'est vous dire comment Mansa Musa était très intéressé par le savoir. Et de son retour de la Mecque, il a amené avec lui un certain nombre d'écrivains, de poètes.
Mansa Musa established the mosques of Timbuktu, which served as Islamic universities and which are UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Salim Oud al-Hajj shows me the documents held at the library of the Grand Mosque, which were mercifully hidden from the destructive action of the extremists when they overran Timbuktu. Many of these books are so fragile they cannot be picked up and studied. It's a whole African literature written in Arabic on a range of subjects like science, mathematics and law, though most of the documents are copies of the Quran and biographies of the Prophet Muhammad. Writers include prominent scholars such as Ahmed Baba, who was born in Timbuktu in the 16th century. In one manuscript, he writes against the practice of slavery.
Are we not all descendants of Adam? For just the fact of becoming the owner of another person bruises the heart, because servitude is inseparable from the idea of violence and domination, especially when it relates to a slave taken away from his country.
As well as Timbuktu, there were other big centres of learning and commerce in the Mali Empire, like Djenné in northern Mali, which is a long car journey from Bamako, followed by a ferry crossing over the Niger River, and again, I need a heavily armed guard. Unlike Timbuktu and its faded splendour, Djenné still retains much of the hurly-burly of everyday life. In fact, Djenné almost certainly predates Timbuktu because it developed from one of the earliest known settlements in Africa.
There's archaeological evidence that the settlement around Djenné was occupied from about 300 years before the Common Era. And that is because archaeological discoveries have been made here at the nearby site of Djenné Djenno. Iron tools and jewellery have been found here, suggesting that this was once an iron-making area. And the archaeological remains would show that this is one of the oldest towns in West Africa. But it seems that Djenné Djenno was gradually abandoned from about the 8th century as people moved to Djenné.
Another legacy of the Mali Empire, apart from its buildings, is the kora. Its sounds are enjoyed by many music lovers. It was invented by the Mandi people at least 3 centuries ago. Siddiqui is the son of the world-renowned kora player Toumani, and he performs under his father's watchful eye. Toumani is not just a musician, he's also a griot, the term used to describe a person who passes down oral history and traditions from one generation to the next.
I'm a Jali, I'm a griot people. You have to be born in griot, but you cannot become a griot. The griot people, they just keep the history going. And you know, music is one of the best way to communicate. For communication, the music is there to help us to do this griot job.
So the kora is essentially the instrument of the Mali Empire?
Yeah. never happened before, never see that before, and you cannot find that. If you see the kora in Sydney or you find the kora in London, ask him where those instruments come from. It will tell you usually one of the country of Manding Empire.
But after the death of Mansa Musa II in 1387, the Mali Empire started losing power because of a succession of weak rulers, short reigns, and dynastic rivalries. Timbuktu was captured by the Tuareg nomads in 1433, and Mali was an empire no more. People today in the country Mali celebrate the great empire whose name the nation bears. This is an art centre in Bamako where one young man tells me the ancient cities of Timbuktu and Djenné give him much inspiration.
Moi, j'ai essayé d'imaginer un peu cette ville qui est un endroit aussi qui est magnifique par son architecture. Donc, c'est quelque chose qui fait partie de la culture, du patrimoine culturel, quoi.
The decline of the Mali Empire, however, did not signal the end of this part of West Africa's glory. A new power emerged, that of the Songhai Empire. Its rulers established a new capital in Gao in the east of Mali. The empire extended as far as modern-day Nigeria and Niger. Flying into Gao, you can see this is strategically positioned along the Niger River. Today, it's a city that's been mired in the conflict with extremists, and so I can't spend much time here. There's a heavy army presence, and there's little to see of its ancient past. But Gao has deep historic roots. It's been inhabited since about the 7th century. Its people were mostly fishermen who used large canoes. They soon realized this gave them a military edge because they could sail along the Niger River, setting up trading villages which allowed them to dominate and unite peasant communities in the region. The best-known ruler of the Songhai Empire was Soni Ali the Great, whose reign began in 1464. He recaptured Timbuktu in 1468 and pushed the city to the pinnacle of its fame. In Songhai oral tradition, Soni Ali is a hero.
Alors, Soni Ali Ber est présenté par les auteurs arabes comme un homme, même physiquement, très fort, un guerrier complet et un homme de très grande volonté. Et qui utilisait aussi beaucoup la sorcellerie, ce qui ne plaisait pas aux marabouts de Tombouctou. Soni Ali a eu beaucoup de problèmes avec les marabouts de Tombouctou, qui le décrivent comme un mauvais musulman, qui ne priait pas régulièrement, qui faisait la magie. Je pense que c'est une des raisons qui explique que Soni Ali Ber n'est pas très présente dans la représentation des grands empires.
Fatimata Maiga is a member of the former ruling dynasty of the Songhai Empire.
Je suis de Gao et je suis très très fière d'être au Gao. Je remercie beaucoup les bon Dieu.
Her daughter explains more about her family's famous ancestry.
L'empire Songhai est vraiment dans l'histoire du Mali est l'une des empires la plus connue et ma maman évidemment est descendante de l'empire Songhai, donc descendante de Soni Ali Ber qui a fondé Gao, la ville mystérieuse. Et nous sommes vraiment fiers, la population de Gao est vraiment fière d'appartenir à l'histoire du Mali, d'appartenir à l'histoire de Soni Ali Ber et surtout d'être descendant de ce grand homme qui est une référence dans l'histoire de Gao et dans l'histoire du monde en général.
However, Soni Ali is not the only famous figure associated with the Songhai Empire. I make my way before the light fails to the main historic attraction of Gao, the tomb of Muhammad Touré, an army commander.
After the death of Soni Ali, his successor was ousted by one of his generals, Mohamed Touré, who established the Askir dynasty. He consolidated the empire and extended its territory. And this mud tomb behind me is that of the Askir dynasty, and it was built in 1495. And it's a testament to the power and riches of the Songhai Empire. And you can see that the mud tomb has wooden spikes sticking out of it, and it's also got a mosque on the site and a cemetery. You can see some of the tombstones, and it's beautifully preserved.
Under Mohamed Touré's Askir dynasty, the Songhai Empire grew ever more rich and powerful. Timbuktu basked in its glory. But Touré was deposed by his son as he grew older, triggering a gradual decline in the empire. Drought, disease, civil war, and invasion meant that by 1591, the Songhai Empire had collapsed. It was broken up into independent kingdoms. One of these kingdoms was the Bambara, based in the pretty riverside town of Ségou. Today, it's a popular venue for cultural festivals in Mali. Kingdoms like Bambara enjoyed prosperity and sovereignty until the arrival of the Europeans in the 1800s. What the period covered in this episode tells us is that Africa made a huge mark on the world through trans-Sahara trade. It also displayed the whole range of political formations, from clans to kingdoms to empires, which demonstrate a history of tremendous richness. Some academics state that it was the Arab and Muslim influence that brought sub-Saharan Africa out of isolation and linked it with the rest of the world. But as UNESCO's General History of Africa tells us, Africans never lived in isolation. Its peoples were constantly on the move. Plus, the volume of trans-Saharan trade meant that there were deep relations between the north and south of the Sahara. I end in Bamako, the capital of Mali, with superstar husband and wife Amadou and Mariam, whose most famous composition, Je pense à toi, provides the theme music for this series. They decided to release it in French to broaden its international appeal.
Ouais, la chanson Je pense à toi, ça concerne partout, ça concerne pour tout le monde. Ça parle pas que l'Afrique, parce que ça parle de l'amour. L'amour, tout le monde est concerné. Ça parle de l'amour de nous d'abord, après, ça concerne tout le monde. Tout le monde se retrouve dedans, quoi.
Notre chanson, ou bien nos chansons d'une manière générale, ça a été une ouverture pour la musique africaine. Parce que nous, on a su mettre la dose entre la musique africaine et la musique universelle. Donc c'est ce côté-là que les gens ont choisi les morceaux, parce que chaque fois que nous jouons, les Africains, les Américains, les Européens, tout le monde se
retrouve dedans.
C'est pour cela.
Well, perhaps I could ask you both if you would be so kind as to perform Je pense à toi for us now. Thank you. In the next episode, we see how city-states and kingdoms further west in Africa gave rise to rich and diverse civilizations, including some of the best-known works of art in the whole of the continent.
Abandonne pas mon amour, ma chérie. J'aime pas